The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
As Jesus drew near Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If this day you only knew what makes for peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. For the days are coming upon you when your enemies will raise a palisade against you. They will encircle you and hem you in on all sides. They will smash you to the ground and your children within you. They will not leave one stone upon another within you, because you do not recognize the time of your visitation." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
One of the tenets of our Catholic Christian faith is that we believe that Jesus is fully God, but also fully human. And often it's easy for people to kind of underplay the humanity of Jesus. And I know when I was little, I used to imagine in my childlike mind that Jesus was lying in the manger and he knew what was on the math test that I was going to have in 4th grade, and he would get the right answer even though he was this tiny baby, or that later he would know calculus and all that stuff. But that's Jesus knowing and coming to awareness was the same as you and I experienced. He went from human ignorance to human knowledge, and an important part of his growth and awareness was growing up with his parents, Mary and Joseph. Just like you and I, whoever was the significant people, hopefully parents, but maybe a grandmother, an aunt, a guardian, whoever, adoptive parents, that were the ones that were the significant influence on us, really have a lot of power, and they teach us so much about what being a human being is all about. And I find it interesting that in Jesus' day, he learned in his family how to weep. And so we know there's just a couple of incidences where we see that. One of them is the one where he comes to the city of, he's looking over the city of Jerusalem, and he begins to weep. He's terribly sad that they keep making political choices that lead to their destruction. They always wind up caught up in violence. And then we know that he was at the tomb of Lazarus, his good friend, and the shortest verse in the New Testament is, Jesus wept, and Jesus wept. And that in that verse it says, well, he did what you and I do when we go to a wake, or a loved one has died and we're there at the hospital waiting for the undertaker to get there, and so on. And I value that somehow Mary and Joseph taught Jesus that it was a good human thing to be able to weep. And so I'm just kind of reflecting today on what we weep about. What is it that gets into our spirit that causes us to weep? And I would imagine most of us here, if a loved one dies, we will have that reaction. We'll weep. My mother was a very reserved person in many ways. I never saw her cry in all the years that I knew her. Both of her parents had died before I was born. But when my dad died, I just saw the side of her that she just poured out these tears, and it was it was sad and painful to hear, but it was also a good thing to hear. And I was appreciative of the fact that that was her response, and it told me more about the intimacy she had with my dad than a lot of other things she ever said or did. But then, as I'm thinking about Jesus, and he's growing up, he's wept at a level, but he's also weeping over the city of Jerusalem. And I hear people looking around Flint, and we're devastated. I had a young friend of mine who lives in Dearborn, and he drove up to do an interview at one of our local hospitals for a job. And he had a lot of reservations about whether he wanted to come and interview or even think about coming to the city of Flint. And so he drove to the hospital, and he said, oh, it was kind of nice that he stopped, and he's a Michigan State fan, so he went to the Great Divide, and he was just kind of excited about the store that has both these things, and boy, that's really neat. And so he bought a tie to remember Flint and the interview here. But his first image was, it's the murder capital of the United States. And And I think a lot of us, maybe we don't physically weep, but in our hearts we weep when we see what the city has become and so on. And the prophet Nehemiah in the 6th century BC, when the temple had been destroyed, he manages to come back and he's looking at the rubble of Jerusalem and he starts to weep and he rends his garments and does all those things that a man in mourning would do. But then he does one other thing after he weeps. He rolls up his sleeves and he gets to work to rebuild the city. And so he goes to the king and he goes to this person and that person and kind of organizes how we're going to bring order and how we're going to get the building project underway to rebuild the temple. And I think that's kind of what I see part of the mission of Catholic Charities to do. We're weeping over the city. We see people who come from struggles with addictions and wanting to have children that can't, so they seek adoption, or they need counseling of some kind, family counseling, marital counseling, troubled relationships of parents and children, and all those kinds of things. And then the people need for hunger, and the people need to be fed, people need clothes, and all that stuff we're about doing. But rather than just weeping and say, ain't it awful, we then say, okay, what are we going to do about it? And that's what that place at the corner of 5th Avenue and Saginaw Street, this whole area here is devoted to trying to rebuild. It's kind of the Nehemiah in our midst. And Jesus, we know, didn't just sweep over Jerusalem, go home back to Nazareth and say, well, that's too bad for them. But he went about trying to bring about a change of heart in the people. And that's what you're trying to do day after day after day. So I salute your weeping. I salute the tears that, whether they're physically shed or not, are in your heart as you look at the circumstances of all these people. But I also salute the fact that in whatever way you roll up your sleeves and either try to raise money for them, get food for them, or clothes for them, or shelter for them, or just listen to them and look them in the eye and treat them with respect in a way that perhaps they've never, ever had happen before. And so as we're thinking about Mary today and what she taught Jesus and what Joseph taught Jesus, somewhere along the line you learned that same thing and you're trying to do something with that gift. And so I celebrate that and encourage you to continue to do that.